All right, thank you everyone for joining. We are live. If you want to take a look in the chat, we've posted some questions for you to answer about yourselves, so we can all get to know each other a little better. We'll give you a few minutes to answer those questions about yourself while we go ahead and introduce ourselves and get started. Our workshop today is going to be an introduction to IBM Cloud App ID. So we will teach you how to secure single page applications and get a deeper dive insight into what is authorization and authentication, and a one-step approach to ensuring that your applications are secure using some of the developer tooling we'll introduce you today. My name is Jenna Ritten. I'm a developer advocate with IBM. I currently work out of Austin. I'm currently working from home during the quarantine from Detroit, and my team is located in New York City. I moved from Detroit to San Francisco to attend a coding boot camp, and I got really involved in hackathons and workshops while I was living there, and very active in the meetup community. And I ended up joining IBM in Austin through their tech reentry program about 2 years ago, almost 2.5 years ago. Oh, okay. We've just reposted the questions in there so you can see them as well. Sorry about that. So I joined IBM through the tech reentry program as a cloud developer on one of our soft layer infrastructure teams. I worked on 2 different soft layer teams for 2 years, and I recently transitioned over into advocacy. So some of the questions that we want all of you to answer about yourselves so that we can all get better acquainted and get to know each other a little better. First one is your name and your title or company or program that you're with, where you're from, something you love, and a quirk, something that's uniquely weird or different about you. So again, for those of you who just joined, my name is Jenna. I'm a cloud developer advocate with IBM. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I'm currently working from home in Detroit, Michigan, but I work out of Austin. Something I love is my dogs. I have Yorkies. They're like permanent puppies, 24/7. They always keep things interesting. And a quirk about myself, I have an obsession for tuna salad, tuna pita, tuna melts. So if it's on the menu, I order it. If it's bad, I will probably never return to that restaurant again. So that's a little bit about me. I like to run a lot of community workshops and developer events and help people learn new skills and new tooling to upskill and get better opportunities. So next I'll pass things over to Joyce so she can introduce herself and you can get to know her a little bit better. She's going to be walking you through our content today, since she is the all-knowing, all-seeing creator of the IBM Cloud App ID SDK that we will be exploring today.
Alrighty, so as Jenna mentioned, I'm Joyce. I'm a software engineer at IBM. I'm originally from Seattle, but I moved from there to Austin a year and a half ago, and I'm currently getting my master's in computer science. And I love to bake, and I love food. I love to try new restaurants. I love taking pictures of my food. And a weird fact about me is that I used to have a palm tree named Steven.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kimmy Taft. I'm a software engineer at IBM in the Cloud Security Services group. I have been at IBM for about 2.5 years. I'm originally from Seattle as well, but fun fact, Joyce and I did not know each other until we both moved to Austin. I have a puppy who's about 10 months old now. And a weird fact about me is that I like to eat applesauce with my pizza.
Gross.
Hey, don't judge until you try it, okay?
Okay, so first I wanted to introduce you to this beautiful bit.ly or IBM Biz link here for you. So this is the link to read-only version of the slides that we have started to get into and that we'll be covering today. Just a note to all of you, we will be giving you access to these slides and following up from the event today. We also will show you the resource links for all of the slides and resources later on when we wrap up the workshop as well. So if you want to follow along or if you'd like to take this down now, you can, but again, we'll be sharing it with you later on and following the workshop. So if you would like to follow along with Joyce and spin up your first App ID instance and secure a single page application today, this is the link to sign up for an IBM Cloud account if you don't already have one. If you do already have one, you can just log into your IBM Cloud account. This link will also be available following the workshop for you to sign up for an IBM Cloud account afterwards as well.
Okay, so I'm just gonna jump in here. So the goal of the workshop is to create a single page app from scratch using React and add authentication capabilities to it. Regardless of whether your app is web-based, mobile, or cloud native, you probably need some sort of login functionality to either limit access to your app or backend resources, and even further customize the overall app experience for your users. So this is where authentication authorization comes in. Authentication refers to the process of confirming an identity, basically saying, can a user or application prove who they say they are? And that's usually by providing valid credentials for verification, which often is through a username and password, and sometimes combined with other elements called factors. For example, single factor authentication is just a password. Two-factor authentication is with a password and a piece of confidential information that only the user knows. And multi-factor authentication, which uses 2 or more security factors, such as the password along with a security code that is sent to the user's cell phone. Now, authorization comes after a successful authentication and determines what the user can and cannot access via access token. And we'll talk a little bit more about access tokens in a little bit. So under the hood of authentication authorization are these basic concepts. So for the purpose of this workshop, I'm just gonna go in a very high level 1 or 2 sentence summary of all these concepts, but we'll provide links in the chat if you want to learn more in depth about these topics. So for OAuth 2, it's a open standard protocol that is used to provide authorization, and OIDC, Open ID Connect, is the authentication layer that works with OAuth 2. So OAuth 2 is about resource access and sharing, so a way to get an access token, and OIDC is all about user authentication. And a JSON Web Token is a way that access tokens and identity tokens can be represented. Jumping into OAuth 2 framework, OAuth 2 defines several different flows or grant types for you to get an access token, and you should choose the one that is most suited for your type of application. So I'm just going to go over some of the common ones. So the first one is authorization grant code, which typically is for if your app is running on a web server, it's browser-based or mobile. Client credentials is for an application that does not have a user present. So this is machine-to-machine communication. Resource owner password is for trusted applications only because you're using the password directly. And lastly is the implicit flow, which is for browser-based apps, so apps made with JavaScript. And initially this flow was made because for applications that can't securely store a client secret safely. So with browser apps, you're able to inspect the website and you'll see the entire source code. So having a client secret is not safe because anyone can see that, right? It's in the browser. So with the implicit flow, you get the access token back in the URL. And there is a lot of security flaws with this grant type because once the access token is returned in a URL, it gets logged in the browser's history. And so it's not being returned in a trusted back channel like the way authorization grant code is. And it's actually no longer recommended to implement the implicit flow for browser-based apps. And I'm going to hand off over to Kimmy to talk more about securing single-page applications.
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. So like she said, I'm going to talk about how to secure single-page applications. So a key part of the authorization code flow, like Joyce mentioned, is the assumption that your application is able to securely store client secrets. Public clients or single-page applications are unable to securely store these secrets because they're applications that are run entirely in the browser. So a new flow was needed, and therefore the implicit flow was created. How this flow works is that after a user successfully authenticates, the implicit flow directly returns an access token. As you heard earlier in the authorization code flow, instead of returning an access token, an authorization code is returned, which is then exchanged at the token endpoint to get that access token. So like I said, and like Joyce said, the implicit flow returns an access token as part of the URL, which is stored in the browser, and therefore can be easily intercepted and tokens can be accessed. And additionally, it could be stored in your history or logs, and those could be stored on a cloud service, which is then sent to multiple devices, which then heightens your security risk. As if this wasn't enough, the implicit flow is also susceptible to a redirect URI attack, which means that an attacker might replace an approved redirect URI with the destination of their choice. So how this works is the user would follow the changed link that the bad guys put in place to authorize their client. After authorization, the user is redirected to the bad URI, the attacker's URI, and then you give the attacker access to your legitimate tokens. So this all sounds really bad and scary, right? Good news is there's a new recommended method to secure single page applications, and that's using PXE, or proof key for code exchange. PXE is an enhanced authorization code flow that replaces using the client secret with a code challenge and verifier. The code verifier is a cryptographic random key that is unique to each authorization request. Specifically, it's a string with a minimum length of 43 characters. We have links below if you want to learn more about what exactly the code verifier is. The code challenge is derived from the code verifier. The challenge is an encoded version of the code verifier. And as an option, you can send the challenge method along with your code challenge. If there's no challenge method sent, then it defaults to plain. A more secure option is to use S256. And again, you can refer to the links if you're curious about knowing more. So as you can see, here's a diagram of how PXE works. So when your application makes an authorization request to the server, it includes that code challenge that I talked about earlier. Optionally, at this step, it can include the code challenge method. The server returns the authorization code. And then later on, when your application makes a request to the token endpoint, it includes that code verifier. And then before the server returns an access token, it confirms the validity of the code verifier. If it's invalid, then access is denied. One important piece to take away from this diagram is that utilizing PXE is an addition to the authorization code flow. So moving on, now what have we learned? We've learned that adding authentication and authorization can be risky and complex, which is why we would want to use something such as App ID to handle all these complexities for us, so we don't need to be security experts in order to implement this and have security with our applications. I'm going to go over several features of App ID, and the first I'll talk about is authentication. You can add user sign in and sign up to your mobile and web apps and authorize access to your backend resources and APIs on any cloud. Additionally, you can use any identity provider, including enterprise, social, proprietary, or you can use App ID's scalable registry, Cloud Directory. With Cloud Directory, you can add additional security features such as multi-factor authentication. The next feature is profiles. So with App ID, you have the ability to build custom app experiences for your users. You can use profiles to store and access user data that you will need to build an engaging user experience, such as user app preferences. Next is user management. So with App ID, you can leverage a scalable user registry for your apps so that users can sign up and sign in with an email and password. That's the Cloud Directory that I was talking about earlier. Users can manage their own accounts through self-service flows such as reset password and forgot password. With App ID, you don't have to worry about setting up infrastructure for identity, ensuring geo-availability, compliance, nor availability. App ID is also integrated with IBM Cloud, with IBM Cloud Kubernetes Service, Cloud Functions, Activity Tracker, and more. So you can seamlessly embed identity into your applications. So here's an overview diagram of how App ID works, or App ID in a nutshell, if you will. So as a recap, it's a service to add authentication and authorization capabilities to your applications. It connects identity providers to your application in an industry standard way. So there's several use cases that App ID covers. The first and maybe the most common is for web apps. For web apps, App ID uses the OIDC authorization code flow that Joyce went over. We have a Node SDK that you can use with your web apps. For the mobile flow, you may have guessed it, it's useful when you're developing an application that will be installed on a user's mobile device. We have both Android and a Swift SDK that can be used for mobile apps. Single page applications, that's the focus of this workshop. We have a JavaScript SDK for this case that you'll all get a firsthand experience with. Lastly, we have multi-cloud apps with Istio. So this is for applications that are running on a cluster. App ID utilizes the app identity and access adapter, which can be configured to work with any OIDC compliant identity provider. The adapter enables App ID to control authentication and authorization policies in all environments, including front-end and back-end applications, and it does all of this without any code changes or redeploys to your application. So Jen is going to post a poll, and we would like to know if there's any interest for us to go over any of these other use cases. Okay, so now that we know a little bit more about App ID, here's a diagram that goes more into depth about how to secure single page applications with App ID. I'm not going to go into too much detail with this diagram, but as you can see, this is the authorization code flow with the addition of Pixie. So after a user clicks login, the App ID JavaScript SDK will generate the Pixie challenge and verifier. When there's a request to the authorization endpoint, the SDK will send the challenge and challenge method. After the user enters their credentials successfully, the browser app will make an XHR request to the token endpoint, and here it will send along the Pixie verifier. App ID will verify that the code challenge and verifier are valid, and then return tokens to the browser application. So again, the Pixie is an addition to the authorization code flow. I'll now pass it back to Joyce, who's going to walk you through how to use the App ID JavaScript SDK to secure your own single page application.
Alrighty. Thanks, Kimmy. So here's the link to the SDK that we'll be using today if you're interested in reading more about it. So I think they're going to post the link in the chat for that. And we also have the links to the App ID docs if you want to read more about the other capabilities that App ID covers. And if you're just joining us, we do require you to sign up with IBM Cloud in order to use App ID. So if you haven't signed up already, feel free to copy this link and sign up right now. Okay, let's build something. Okay, I'm assuming a lot of you guys already have a cloud account. So let me do this with you. Okay, so I'm gonna spin up an App ID instance right now. So in the search bar in cloud.ibm.com, you can search up App ID and click on the catalog results. So you'll want to create a Lite instance right here, and then I'm just going to rename it to App ID Lite and create the instance. If anyone's stuck or anything, feel free to say something on the chat and someone will help you. And I'm also looking at the chat as well to make sure that people aren't getting stuck. Okay. So now that we have our Lite instance of App ID, so this is the dashboard. So we'll be needing to create a new application. So I'll head down to the application tab and create a new application. I'm just going to name this demo. And we're going to select the type single page application. As mentioned earlier, single page applications can't securely store client secret. So when I create an application and specifically for a single page application, it's gonna give me a set of credentials that do not have the client secret, and instead by plugging in the client ID and discovery endpoint, which we'll do very soon, the SDK will handle all of that and use the correct flow to secure your single page application. So for right now, all you need is a single page app, applications credentials right here. So we're going to keep this open in a tab because we're going to come back to this later. And we're going to jump into creating a React app. So if you want, you can follow along with me to create a React app, or you guys can use a sample app. There's going to be a link to a already completed React sample app that has App ID integrated, or you guys can go back to the dashboard, and on the overview page, you could actually download some samples. There's an option to download a single page app, and you're able to, and this app, you could just run it straight out of the box, but it is in vanilla JavaScript and not React. So feel free to use any of the sample apps available or follow along with me. Okay. So I'm going to create a React app, npx create React app.
We need some elevator music.
Oh, DJ Kimmy.
I know, I should turn it back on.
All right, DJ Kimmy, let's get it.
Okay, hold on.
So I'm curious, David, are you using a sample app or are you coding along with me today?
Say it again.
Are you using a sample app or are you follow along with me today?
Oh, I'm following along.
Okay. So this does take a few minutes. Okay, cool. Perfect. So I'm gonna open this in my editor real quick. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to install the SDK. And install IBM Cloud App ID JS. Alrighty, and so since we're just using the basic Create React app, I'm just gonna remove all of the stuff that comes with it in app.js and edit directly here. Now we want to import app ID.
Joyce, we have one quick question, if I can just read it off for you.
Sure.
So Satish was asking, is it possible to test or use this app ID based authentication in local developer workspaces too, or does it need to be cloud itself?
Yeah, so you can definitely use this locally. So with this workshop, we'll be able to spin up an app, and then we'll actually be calling the endpoints and using the SDK by app ID, and I'll be showing you a complete flow of authentication. But for sure, you could definitely use app ID and locally, but you could also use it with any cloud as well. So import app ID from the library. And then now we're going to need to initialize this. I'm going to use some hooks from React. Use effect here. And we need to initialize it. So let's call this app ID. Creating a new instance of app ID here. And using the use effect hook, we're going to instantiate app ID like this. So what we're going to do here is, remember earlier when we created our application credentials, we created the single page app with a set of like client ID and your tenant ID. So we're going to need that information right here. So we're going to call the initial init function of app ID, and what we're going to pass in is the client credential, client ID, and discovery endpoint. And in the background, the SDK is going to call our server and validate that this is the correct credentials, and so then your React app can talk successfully with app ID. Discovery. So to get these two values that we need, let's go back to our applications tab. We're going to copy this client ID value, and we're going to paste it here. And then the discovery endpoint, which is also found here. So we're going to want to do something here if it fails. So let's create a state so we can capture any errors and display it if we want. Set error use state. Just leave it empty for now. So if this fails for some reason, let's set the error to the message. And of course, we're gonna want to see like maybe we want to display it to the user right now if for some reason the login isn't working. So let's do like an error message here. Oops. Okay. So, so this part of the app, we want to have some sort of like title, let's say. So I'm just gonna make up a title saying, welcome to this super cool app. And so, you know, with a login functionality, you are trying to only allow authenticated users to see certain parts of the app, right? So let's say there's a part of the app that is super secret. Only authenticated users can see this. Authenticated users can see this. So how do we like hide this until like an authenticated user is logged in, and then we can display it? So what I would do here is to have like a login button. Let me just do the button real quick. And let's create a login function. And then we'll just have a text called login. Okay, so now that we have the function ready to initialize app ID, now we can create a function that uses the sign in function. So let's create that real quick. Let's call this login. So when we're calling the app ID sign-in function, it's going to return a set of tokens if it's successful. So we're going to make the call and set it to a variable called tokens. App ID. So when this is called, when the user clicks login, this is going to be launched, and as Kimmy mentioned earlier in the diagram, this is going to open a login widget, and so the user can sign in. And let's finish this function up so I can show that token. And let's create a state so that we know that there is an authenticated user. So we'll have a variable called user name and set user name is use state. For now, it's an empty string. And so let's wrap this in a catch. Okay. So let's see. So after this is completed, assuming that it didn't fail, we can go ahead and set the username to one of the token. We could get the username from tokens. So what it's going to return, so this function, after successful login, it's going to return the access token, ID token, and the respective payloads. So I could go ahead and say, in the tokens, I want the ID token payload and the name from it. And down here, let's say I only want this displayed if there is a user name. Okay. And for now, let's console error this. And then I think for now we could go ahead and do npm start. I already have something on 3000, so I think it's going to open on 2002. Okay, so this is a super cool app. We have the login button we just created, and we see that, you know, there is not the secret protective information because we're not logged in yet. Okay, so let's log in. And let's see what happened. I clicked on it. Okay, so earlier we had this error state. Let's actually add that to the web page just so we can see what's going on. It was not defined. Missing dependency. Okay, now. Okay, let's see what's up. The set error. If anyone's following along and see where there is a mistake, feel free to help me out, but let me see.
Someone asked, what's the error you're looking for?
Yeah, right now, I clicked the button and it did not open a.
Does it need open and close parens after the login?
Sign in is not functioning.
Like after the on click? Down a little more. The login doesn't need a.
I believe that this is like that, not a capital I. Okay, there we go. Cool. So we hitting app ID. Okay, the mistake was I used a capital I instead of a lowercase I, and that's not a proper function. Okay, so back to this. So right now I'm getting an error, right? So invalid redirect URI. So we need to tell app ID that where the tokens are returning back to. So let's go back to this page, back to your app ID dashboard. If you're also hitting an error, head over to the Manage Authentication tab. And inside Authentication Settings, we want to add our URL so that app ID knows that this is a valid URL and it's associated with your app. So I believe it's 3002. We'll click Add. And cool. Now let's try that again. Log in. Cool. So now we can see that we're in a login page right now, and this is all handled by app ID. So the user can log in via Facebook, Google. So this is a default login page, right? And then here is the email and password that is part of the user directory provided by app ID. So a user can actually, if they don't have an account or if they don't want to sign in with their social media, they could create their own account in Cloud Directory that Kimmy mentioned earlier. So I'm gonna go ahead and sign up. Joyce, my email, and then the password. I'm gonna sign up. Okay, so I have to confirm my email. So let me just wait for that email. Okay, I got it. So let me verify it in my email. Okay, now I could hit sign in again. And now I should be able to sign in. Okay. Let's see. Let's hit sign in again. Interesting. Okay, so it seems like I wasn't able to verify my email, which is okay because we can go over to Cloud Directory and back to the dashboard, and we could configure some of the settings over here. So by default, any new user that signs up using Cloud Directory will need to verify their email. And this is something that we can disable. And so once I do this, I should be able to log in without needing to verify my email. Okay, cool. And now you see my super secret only authenticated users can see this now. So login was successful, and we're able to get the tokens in our app. And wondering if there's any questions so far, if anyone's following along and are stuck anywhere, please let me know. Cool. So this is like a super simplified version of like adding authentication to a React app.
We
Right.
do have one question.
Okay.
Okay, so someone said, can we redirect to W3 when the user clicks on login, or directly to the W3 page if it didn't log in?
Yeah, so W3 is the IBM's internal like user directory, right? So if you're an IBMer, you can set App ID up with W3, and you will need to have a whitelisted version of App ID because we need to make sure it's for an IBMer account. But yes, you can configure W3 with SAML configuration. So there's actually some docs here that will let you know how to do that. Can you get that?
Yeah.
Doc?
Yeah, I'll post a link to that in the chat. I also want to just mention too, you can customize the options that a user has. So which IDP they can log in with. Yeah, so Joyce is showing the manage identity providers page. So you could turn off everything except for Facebook, for example, and then users can only use their Facebook account to log in, or Cloud Directory or W3. And you can bring your own custom identity provider as well. But yeah, let me get the link for W3 if you're curious about that.
Yep. So like Kimi just said, there's a feature on App ID where you can manage the identity providers. So I turn off everything but Facebook. And when I click login from my app, it actually just takes me directly to Facebook and lets the user sign in. And once that is completed, then it'll return back to tokens to your app, and you could do whatever you want with the tokens for whatever your app's purpose is. And yeah, so that is the basic overview of adding App ID to your JavaScript app. Is there anything you guys wanted to see more? I could demo this. If not, I'm going to customize my login widget and add a logo and to make it fun. Let's see. So add a little palm tree because that is in mood right now. It's Cinco de Mayo. Save changes. So once I save this, like it's immediately going to show up here, except of course I still only have Facebook enabled. So I'm gonna turn on Cloud Directory again. And so now that when I log in, I get to see my nice customized login widget. And log in.
Ooh, someone asked, what's your palm tree named?
No, it's not Steven 2.0, maybe. It's keyword is I used to have a palm tree named Steven.
Good answer.
Yep. Alrighty. I think that's all I've got, unless there's some special requests.
Let me go back to
The slides.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so congratulations, Joyce, on your fantastic application and demonstration. And to any of you that are following along or that are going to follow along later and build your own single page application with the App ID product integrated into your application, congratulations, your app is live, it is functional, it's doing the thing, you can customize it. We are going to be taking another deep dive and another look at App ID at the end of the month as well. We also will be doing this workshop again sometime in the near future. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is, we're going to share the resource links with you. If you would first be so kind as to fill out a feedback survey. It's very, very short. It's only 2 questions on any feedback you have, what you really liked about the workshop, some things that you would like to see expanded upon and at a later date. This is the link for that here. So we're going to leave that up for just a second for you to go.
So you can go back on YouTube and watch the whole lecture.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Are you able to go back on YouTube and watch the whole lecture?
Yes, so this is being live streamed to YouTube, so the recording will be there, and I will be sharing the link to the recording as well as all of the resource links and the links to these slides in the follow-up email. Joyce, if you go ahead one more slide. So here are the resource links here. And again, I will be sharing the recording and all of these resources as well. So we have the view-only version of the slides. We have the IBM Cloud sign-up link. And then we also have the feedback survey link here as well. So we'll just leave those up for a minute so that you can have some time to fill those out.
Cool.
And then, so we've aggregated the authentication resources and the different topics that we've touched on throughout this workshop. So you can reference all of the different parts to the workshop that we covered here. So OAuth, OpenID Connect, JSON Web Tokens, and Pixie. And then we also have the App ID resources for you as well on the next slide. So the App ID SDK and the App ID documentation. And on the next slide, we have different ways you can connect with us on social media. So if you registered through the IBM Developer Austin meetup group, all of us are cloud engineers based out of Austin. So this is the meetup URL for IBM Developer Austin meetup group. You can also follow IBM Developer on Twitter and Twitch. And you can follow IBM Developer on YouTube as well. Joyce, if you go back to the workshop resources. We'll leave those up.
This one?
Back 2 more. There we go. So everything you need, you can get from the IBM Biz link, the intro to App ID slides. Those are will give you access to the slides with all of the links and all the resources on them. Again, we will leave those up for you for a few minutes. I would like to thank you all for coming. I would like to wish you all a very happy Cinco de Mayo. I'm going to share a little Cinco de Mayo.
You too. Happy Cinco de Mayo.
Sharing a little link from history.com if you'd like to learn some more information about the significance of Cinco de Mayo. If anyone has any questions, now would be a perfect time to ask those. We have some time to answer while we have Joyce and Kimmy available to answer your questions for you. And take your time, no rush.
So I came in late because I didn't get the link when I signed up. I just recently in the comments, somebody posted the link at the last minute. I came in on this. So if I watch the playback on YouTube, that's going to be the exact same thing that you guys just did?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, good. All right. And then the workshop resources. Now, what are those? Are those like downloads or what?
So these are links. So the first link here is a link. If you put it in your browser, it will take you to a read-only version of the Google Slides. So it'll give you access to the actual slides, so you can follow along with the presentation that we showed throughout the workshop. The second one is a link to sign up for an IBM Cloud account if you don't already have one. And then the third one is just the feedback survey for the workshop.
Oh, wow. Okay. Thanks.
Yep. So we'll leave these up for you. We're going to stick around for a little bit. So if you have any questions, oh, here's a question. Which is the best option, App ID based versus Passport JS based for a React based application? Can you please share some differences around it?
Yeah, so from my understanding, like Passport, correct me if I'm wrong, is for like backend. If you like writing a backend web server, is that correct? So if that's the case, you actually use App ID for both like browser-based and web apps. Like if you're running like a web server, which is a use case, from my understanding, is what Passport.js is mainly for. There's SDKs for both of those. So if you look at our Node SDK, if someone can drop the link for that, you can actually see it's like built on top of Passport, I believe. And so you could use App ID to secure any kind of like React application, plain JS application, a Node.js application. And so that's my answer for that one.
And we just added the link for the App ID Node SDK in the chat as well. Joyce, if you can go to the last slide, we'll just leave that up while people are finishing up and coming up with any questions they may have or want to add to the chat. And we will be sticking around for just a little bit longer. If you have any questions or if you think of something, feel free to post it in the chat, or you can go ahead and ask it. We'll put DJ Kimmy back on the 1s and 2s so she can keep us entertained while we're all thinking.
So I have a question. Does this the speaker that hosted does this person do other tutorials and lectures or walkthroughs that we have it?
Yeah, so this is part of the IBM Developer Austin Federated Advocacy Group. So this workshop specifically was on App ID, but we cover a range of topics. We're going to be talking about API Connect. We're going to be talking about serverless functions. We're going to be talking about, we have covered IBM Blockchain 101. We've covered IBM Watson Studio, AI and machine learning tooling that we have within the within IBM Watson Studio. So we cover a range of topics, and we promote the registration through the different IBM Developer Austin, as well as the other IBM Developer City meetup groups as well. All of the events can be found on developer.ibm.com. I'm actually going to add that. .com.
But like, so this doesn't take place all on the same tutorial. They're different ones you can sign up for, or how does it go?
Yes, so they're separate. So this workshop specifically is App ID, but we post them as separate events, both on the meetup group, and you can also find them under our community events on developer.ibm.com as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. I'll just look out for them.
Yep, no worries. And then it looks like we have Par here, has a question. If you want to go ahead and ask.
Yeah, my question is about the application, the App ID. Is that secure in the sense that if I add it to my application, can IBM backdoor it in case of any, you know, necessity that may come up in the future?
So your question was, if you use App ID, is IBM gonna, you know, be part of it in any type of way? Is that my understanding?
Yeah, or is it just like something that I can add to my application?
Yeah, for sure. So when you use any of our SDKs, you'll install it however you would normally install a library for your application. So yeah, it's completely safe. It's completely compliant to any of the security protocols that you have. And as long as you have a IBM Cloud account, you could use App ID.
Okay, thank you.
And for most of the IBM Cloud products and tooling, we have free Lite tier accounts or some sort of free version available, so that any open source projects or open source contributors can use, make use of our catalog of products as well. And there was a question here. It says, do you know of developer.ibm.com code patterns using App ID? That's a perfect question. Joyce and I are working on a code pattern at the moment. Hopefully we will get that published for all of you in the very near future. It needs to go through a few processes before we can make that happen, but we are working on it. Kimmy also just posted in the chat a Spring Framework tutorial if you would like to take a look at that. All right, if we don't have any other questions, we're going to hang out here for just a few minutes and then we're going to end the live stream. But I want to thank you all very, very much for coming, for taking out time out of your busy weeks, especially during this time of quarantine and things are a little bit chaotic. Also, Think is happening online. It is free for everyone to attend. Today and tomorrow. We will I'm going to add the link to that in the chat as well, so you can all join if you would like. I want to wish all of you a very happy Cinco de Mayo. And for those of you that maybe are not celebrating, a wonderful Taco Tuesday. Or whatever you celebrate Tuesday. Tuesdays for me are Tutorial Tuesday. So I want to wish you a wonderful Tuesday. And we'll see you all at the next one.
Thank you. You too.